Welcome to Tough Topics. I'm your host, Vonny Sweetland, and today we're placing the spotlight on civil discourse. For years, countries like Canada and the United States have been a beacon of hope for those wanting to be part of a culture that encourages civil discourse. Because after all, it's discourse that supports rather than undermines societal good. Whether it's politics, industry, social subjects, our ability to peacefully coexist as Canadians while sharing different perspectives that we all don't always agree with has made us unique. It's helped this country grow. But what happens when healthy dialogue is no more? When sharing an unpopular opinion or position is not only taboo, but puts your livelihood, and in some cases, even your life, in jeopardy? Well, that's what's happening in this new era of cancel culture, media bias, and social media mobbing. Here to discuss is veteran journalist Tasha Kheiriddin, whose recent story in the National Post subjected her to some of this. Good morning, Tasha. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm well, Vonny. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Of course. I'm just going to jump right into it because you've had a rather rough past couple of weeks. I think our viewers are best to hear it from you rather than me. What happened? What was your experience? You recently decided to write about vaccinations in the National Post, and it's my understanding that you took what you call a moderate position on vaccines and mandates, and you somehow became public enemy number one.
Well, that pretty much sums it up. I'll give a few more details. So I have a weekly column in the Post, and my column touched on vaccination. I was contrasting the positions of Justin Trudeau and Erin O'Toole, and I said both, in fact, were too extreme in my view, one being complete demonization, the Prime Minister who called anti-vaxxers or non-vaccinated people racist and misogynist on a French television show back in December. And then Erin O'Toole, who said he was in favor of accommodation, things like rapid tests and others. And I said, honestly, between these two, I think the best path lies, and that is a continuation of vaccine mandates, getting as many people vaccinated as possible. And if you're not going to be vaccinated, that yes, your activities would be restricted, in part to encourage you, but also to protect those who are. And the pushback I got was unlike anything I've actually ever seen on a column. And I've written some columns that have generated a lot of mail, but this got a lot of negativity. So I followed it up with a column explaining exactly what we're talking about today and what had happened, because I got death threats as well against me and my family, which was, that was very disconcerting. Yeah. And so I wrote a piece then on the need for civil discourse on this issue. And the response to that was a lot better. Or more heartening anyway. So we can discuss that too.
Yeah, and how did you deal with that? I mean, as a journalist, you of course understand that this comes with the job, it comes with the territory, but what was it like emotionally? Did that take a bit of a toll on you? Because as you said, this time the mail was different in nature than what you're used to.
Yes, I mean, I've had negative responses to columns I've written in the past on a variety of issues. I've written about politics, I've written about social issues, you name it, everything. And I've had people, call me names occasionally. I don't get a lot of that, which I'm thankful for. I know some of my peers, including a lot of women, you can see this on Twitter. You go there, it can be a very hostile sort of space. I haven't experienced that to that degree. Here I did. Like I said, I got called names you would not call your female relatives. Let's put it that way. A lot of that. But I also had, like I said, people saying, I'd like to see you and your family's brains splattered on your wall. That was a little hard. I spoke to my editor because, emotionally it did affect me. I would say for the 48 hours after a lot of his stuff came in, and I'm a pretty thick-skinned person. But I looked at this and thought, in fact, it was more emotional distress, less for me, but for the situation, because I thought, this issue is really tearing people apart. And that made me feel almost worse, because finding a path out of that is, it's beyond the purview of any journalist or any writer. It's a social issue that we all have to deal with. So how are we going to get there? So that made me think a lot. I was, reflecting on that a lot during the week.
Yes, of course. I understand wholeheartedly. I myself am a journalist by trade, and
Hmm.
I as well have gotten tons of mail on various articles. But what you're speaking about is really unacceptable. I mean, when we start getting into death threats, I think that's really crossing a line. We're going to pick up just after these messages. We'll be right back with Tasha Kheiriddin. So I wrote an article last year in the Daily Hive arguing against mandates. I said that I supported vaccines, but I didn't necessarily support all of the mandates that we were seeing at the time. And I went a step further to say that I was concerned mandates could affect communities of color by causing them even more discrimination. So a slightly different topic and a different position than yours, but I too was attacked ferociously online, being told I was a demon. One person, I recall this because I've never been called a terrorist before, but I certainly got that. And this was all just for me stating that I didn't necessarily support mandates. So I think this happens regardless of the position you take in an article. One side or the other just really comes out swinging. And it's always been like that in journalism. It's the nature of how people react to things they like or dislike. But I feel it's become heightened and much more intense in these last few years. So to say that, journalist to journalist, how do you think that environment affects writing and reporting? Does it make you rethink what you may say in an article, a position you may take?
I think it could definitely do that, especially if you are, maybe younger, starting out in this profession. That it might be something that you have to have a thick skin, like I said, to handle some of this stuff, and it could be very disconcerting. I think that you mentioned cancel culture earlier. I think in your introduction, Vonny,
Yes.
and I think that this is part of it. Is that people fear that if they speak out on anything on either side, like you said, we had different positions and both got really visceral reaction, that you just don't say anything. And so people will shy away from certain topics because they just feel if they say anything, they're going to get attacked from one side or the other. And that is a really distressing thing. I think, in my case, my editor, when I spoke to him, said that the Post is running a special on the weekend. Would you consider maybe writing a piece, describe your experience? And I hesitated for a second. I thought, do I want to put myself out there again? Do I want to get more mail like this again for another few days? But then I thought, if I don't say anything, I'm ceding the ground. And so I thought, okay. And I did write about my experience in the second piece. And lo and behold, the reaction there was really heartening, because not only did I get a lot of people saying, hey, I actually supported what you said. I just, because I supported, I didn't write into you to say that. And I feel terrible that this happened to you. But I got a lot of mail also from people who supported the opposite position, who would have agreed with you, for example, didn't like vaccine mandates. But they disagreed with me respectfully. And they said, I'm really sorry about what happened to you, but I'd like to engage with you in a dialogue. And that cheered me so much. I made a point of answering as many of those messages as I could. Some people still call me names. I didn't answer those. But it showed me that it gave me some resolve to your point, that you do hold your ground, but you do it with respect. And that's what people need to learn to do more in our society today.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think at one point we had that. And I just have to say, I think we've lost it. And I don't know where we lost it, but it seems like it was lost somewhere along the lines of this pandemic. I think everybody is extremely politically charged right now. The political climate is quite divisive. And because of that, we're just seeing people almost, in some cases, lose their humanity. Would you agree?
I would. I think the pandemic accelerated what was already there. It's an old saw to blame social media, but I will put a lot of blame on social media simply in the way that its structure appeals or brings out, I think, some of our worst impulses. When you can be anonymous or at least miles away in cyberspace from your target, it's a lot easier to be cruel, to say things you wouldn't say face to face, because you don't have to deal with the repercussions. It's like yelling at your TV, except we're all now yelling at our TV on Twitter or on, Parler or Rumble, all these places. And many of them have become silos too, where people they just preach to the converted. So they will get more and more extreme in an effort to gain views and gain popularity. It's also become a business. A lot of the disinformation that was spread in the last 2 US election campaigns was not done for positions of ideology. It was either done by rogue states or states that maybe not rogue, but big ones who wanted, to influence elections, but also by individuals who just wanted clickbait to get money. And they made up all sorts of stuff and put it out there.
Yeah, we've seen it happen. And we're, again, in this climate now where people are using social media to benefit themselves financially and will say and do just about anything for that exposure. I think it's a real problem, and we're going to pick up and touch on it just after these messages. Tasha, you mentioned in your follow-up article with the National Post that a fair number of messages came from readers who described themselves as double vaccinated and boosted, arguing since Omicron infects pretty much everyone, including vaccinated people, we've got to stop this sort of vax versus unvaxxed mentality and just end all of restrictions. I understand the importance of vaccines. I myself am vaccinated, and of course also not overloading our hospitals. But what do you say to those people who say, look, this affects everyone, we're wearing the masks, we're following the restrictions, so get rid of the mandates? Do you think it's a fair position to take?
I don't, and I hear the mail cranking up right now as I say this, but I'll say why. I think that yes, Omicron is a different beast. Clearly, we've seen that. We've seen it around the world, and we know that if you are even double vaxxed and boosted, you can get sick. And I know so many people at this point. Every day, there's somebody I know who's got COVID, and most of them are in that category. They've received their booster. They're not just double vaxxed. And in most cases, their infection is mild. Only a few people have had it seriously. None have been in the hospital. And so to me, that is, that is the benefit the vaccine is giving. A lot of the people who said, I've been vaccinated and consequently, I know everyone's going to get it. And so let's drop it all. We saw what happened when Quebec brought in the threat of a tax. And they brought in some of the most strict mandates, restrictions on access to events and this kind of thing. There was a huge uptake in vaccines the very next day. People will say, well, that's forcing you to get vaccinated. It's not. It's giving you a choice. It's saying, look, if you don't want to engage with these things, then don't. But if you do get your vaccine, then you will. And look at other countries around the world. People will say, well, Canada's how well are we actually doing? Well, we are actually doing incredibly well. I mean, the UK just dropped all their mandates. They're dropping their mandates. They're dropping even the mask mandate. They have, it's 2,274, I looked this up, deaths per million. Canada is just over 800 deaths per million. The US is even more. It's like 2,500 deaths per million. Countries with more severe restrictions, like New Zealand, well, it's 11 deaths per million. So South Korea is like in the 50s, I believe. It does make a difference in terms of increasing vaccination rates, but also having mandates to limit circulation. Because what it does too, I think it sends a message that if you are going to go to these things, you still have to be careful. And I think for vaccinated people as well, there is a sense of continued vigilance. If you drop everything, it's like, well, it's like a big free-for-all. Who cares? Maybe I won't wear my mask that day, or it doesn't matter. Or unfortunately, I wish it were so. Yeah. But it's not yet.
Well, I think what some people argue is that there's this line between public health and public safety and, charter rights and freedoms and, of course, protecting people's civil liberties.
100%. But let's see, how often has a pandemic like this swept the globe? The last one was 100 years ago. Are we descending into Orwell's 1984 because of this? I don't think so. No government has an interest in maintaining these restrictions beyond the necessary because they are economically damaging. Let's be honest, they are. Business will tell you, individuals will tell you. There's no incentive for democratic governments anyway. Non-democratic governments like China, where you have people can't even leave their house at all. They get groceries delivered to the door, and then they don't even have enough food
It's crippled the economy. The global economy is crippled by this. Absolutely.
It has. But my point is that China had horribly restrictive policies on and human rights abuses even before the pandemic. So I don't think it's changed things. I don't think we're descending, as people say, this is an excuse. You'll hear this a lot from people who are either not vaccinated, opposed to vaccination, say, this is an excuse. I think half the people who have not chosen to get their shot, it's because they don't want the government to tell them what to do. To me, I don't see this as the government telling you what to do. I see this as doing this for your neighbors, your friends, the society you live in, the people who are vulnerable. It is a situation where we are responsible for each other. And in a social contract, which we have, I'm not going to start quoting Rousseau or anything here because I'm not a big Rousseauian, but even a conservative like Edmund Burke would agree that you have rights and you have responsibilities that correlate, and your community matters. If you're not doing this for, the city down, let's say you live in Northern Ontario, you're not doing this for Toronto, but you're doing it for your community because eventually it will touch you too. To me, it's a question of caring. And so
caring for your neighbor and ensuring yes. that everybody's safe and protected. And I think many people would agree with you on that point. But on the flip side, other people would also argue that they don't want their civil liberties being taken away. Very tricky subject, but we will jump right back into it after these messages. Shifting gears a little bit here, you're a journalist, as we've said throughout this segment, so I'm sure you've probably already seen some of this brewing in the press the last few weeks. Tara Henley, a senior journalist at the CBC, resigned due to what she called a climate that seeks to embrace cognitive dissonance and to abandon journalistic integrity. Her piece was also in the National Post. What is your take? Do you think some of the recent calls to defund the CBC are appropriate? And do you think journalistic integrity in general is at stake in 2022?
Yeah, I read the Tara Henley piece, and the CBC she described was certainly not a CBC that I experienced 25 years ago now, and actually 24 years ago when I started working with the CBC on a couple of shows that I produced with them. And it's also not CBC. I remember even a few years before this pandemic, what she described was a culture of censorship of ideas and privileging of identity over, as she put it, journalistic integrity or the importance of certain stories, this kind of thing. I think that, I can't verify if what she said really is the case. I've seen some of the stuff that's come out of the CBC of late, including one piece that really struck me as, why would you write this? It's basically about words you shouldn't say anymore and why they are bad, sort of thing. One of them was, ironically, the word brainstorm, which was seen as potentially injurious to neurodiverse people. As the mother of a neurodiverse child, I sort of laughed at that because I said, you know what, honestly, brainstorm's used as a positive word, if anything. People who are neurotypical like me don't have as easy a time of it as my kid would, who is neurodiverse. So props to her. It's not a negative thing. It was a very strange article to come out of the CBC because basically it was that. It was like, here's things you should censor coming from a broadcaster, which you would think would be they're airing different points of view. And so I think that the desire not to offend has gone to places where it does limit what we can say. And it's not just the CBC that's affected by that. I'm personally not in favor of defunding the CBC. I have suggested in the past moving to a different kind of model, which combines both public support and some government funding, matching, for example, this kind of thing. Because I do think that the CBC has to find a way to connect with the public a bit more. And it does right now because its numbers have, quite frankly, have dropped for a lot of its programming, which is unfortunate because we are still all paying for it. Yeah, so there has to be some accountability there.
And I think what it is trying to make a better product, right? You've got to have a CBC, and not just the CBC, this should be the goal for all publications and outlets, that is reflective of the entire diverse readership or audience. And I think the feeling amongst at least conservatives is that their voices are not represented in mainstream press as much as, say, liberal voices and liberal perspectives. Would you say that that's a fair analysis?
I think it is a fair analysis in some respects. There's areas of media that are more conservative friendly, if you will, from a small c perspective. Talk radio is one of them. Talk radio has always been skewed more to a small c or right of center point of view. You have others like television. It really depends on the station. And some stations will be more balanced than others, to be honest with you. Polling that was done, and I wrote about this a number of years ago, journalists themselves show that most people working in the media, most journalists, a majority anyway, more than the 50%, will skew leftward in their views. And that is just a personal thing they bring to work. And to say to people, you should not bring yourself to work, you have to be completely objective, is a great objective in itself. But we all know that is not always what ends up happening. It's hard to do. And you look at stations like CNN and Fox. Why do they represent things the way they do? It's also because of eyeballs on screens. And it's because of money and advertising, and they need to reach a public. And in the immediate environment we're in, especially with social media, online media, it's the long tail of advertising. Unfortunately, the more niche a public you can have, the more captive you have it, and the more you can tailor your ads and get
and
support
so and then that brings us down a rabbit hole, and I think it's unfortunate. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tasha. I really do wish you well, and I'm sorry about your experiences, and I really hope you keep fighting the good fight as far as journalism goes.
Thank you so much, Vonny. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. A perfect display of civil discourse. We discussed many hot-button issues and topics, and different opinions we certainly had, but we still moved the discussion forward. And frankly, that's my hope for all Canadians, all Americans, all people. Don't let difference of opinion become your enemy, because when we disagree and discuss, we learn. And when we learn, we grow. I'm your host, Vonny Sweetland, and thank you to all of you at home for tuning in to another episode of Tough Topics.